Danaïd is a sculpture by Auguste Rodin, based on the account in the Metamorphoses of Hypermnestra, eldest of the Danaides. Originally produced in 1890 in marble, bronze casts of Danaïd began to be produced in 1891 and are in collections in France as well as the Musée Rodin in Mexico City. Modeled for the gates of hell circa 1885, this figure was eventually excluded from the final version of the portal. Also known as the Spring, the sculpture was purchased by the Musée du Luxembourg, Paris, the museum reserved for works by living artists, after it was shown at the Salon in 1890. Adapting a mythological theme, the daughters of Danaos, or Danaids, were made to fill up a bottomless barrel with water in punishment for killing their husbands on their wedding night. Rodin above all constructed a feminine landscape by highlighting the curve of the back and neck.
Hell is a very real place that many people can have very wrong ideas about. It's not a fun place by any means, and if people thought about it correctly, they would more than likely do everything they can to avoid it. So for people who are curious about what kind of place hell actually is, here's everything that you need to know. Point number 1. Hell currently has no people in it. Revelation chapter 20 verses 13 to 14. The sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades delivered up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. It's important to note here that this passage occurs at the end of the age, when the world and everything in it will be put away, and then God ushers in a new heaven and a new earth that won't have any sin, pain, or death. But before God does this, he'll judge people, and death was cast into the lake of fire, and then those in Hades were cast into the lake of fire. And this lake of fire is known as Gehenna, or hell. And before the people in Hades were cast into this lake of fire, only two people were already there, and that's the Antichrist and the false prophet. So if the Antichrist and false prophet aren't there right now, it would mean that as of yet, this place is not habited by any people. And this raises the question, where are the people who aren't in heaven if they're not in hell? And we have the answer in point number 2. Hell is the final destination for those in Hades. Luke chapter 16 verses 22 to 24. So it was that the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried, and being in torments in Hades, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. Then he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. In this passage, Jesus spoke of a beggar named Lazarus and a rich man. And when they died, Lazarus went to a place called Abraham's bosom, and the rich man went to a place called Hades. And it's important to note here that this passage is not a parable where Jesus tells a story that has a spiritual meaning. Rather, this passage is about Jesus giving an account of what actually happened.
Rodin's genius lay in the way he took the classical sculpted figure and gave it an animation and vitality that helped define the modern age. His work shaped the future of sculpture, with his most famous pieces, The Thinker, The Kiss, and The Gates of Hell, sitting proudly amongst the most iconic in the canon of modern art. His controversial monuments to greats of French literature, meanwhile, carry a raw, unpolished intensity that brought sculpture into line with the aesthetic revolution that made Paris the center of the contemporary art world.